Let's face it, there's not that many games on the Sega Saturn that are RPGs. And unfortunately, many of these RPGs get overshadowed by the Working Designs games. Understandably so, but there are several games, several RPGs on the Sega Saturn that you might not know about, and nobody seems to talk about them. So here we go. Virtual Hydlide. The opening to this game is just so incredibly epic. It is so early 90s, it's just eat up with that early 90s charm. And with that, I think it's important to consider where this game was in context, This game was actually pretty innovative for the time. You have to remember that these graphics were state-of-the-art, that this gameplay was cutting-edge, like bleeding-edge stuff. So let's keep all these things in mind while we talk about Virtual Hydlide, because, it's not that great. We want to focus on the good things about this game. Let me convince you to try it out. The leveling system in this game is based on completing tasks rather than experience, so the grind is a bit weird. Typically RPG fans, they enjoy, fighting monsters and winning mini battles to build their character up, to make them stronger. But when you're forced to just do tasks to do so, it makes it a little odd. I like the idea of fighting a bunch of slimes and leveling up that way, but that's just not the way it works in this game. The cover art to this game is just, look, it's chef's kiss, 10 out of 10. I love it. It is straight up goofy. Sort of like that introduction, but man, I dig it. There's an evil dude who turns the princess into fairies, and you have to find these fairies and the gems to restore these fairies, and then kick the big dude's butt. It's pretty standard fare stuff, but I like that. I can appreciate that simplicity, right? This game is not commonly well received, and most people just, they flat out hate this game, naming it as the worst RPG on the Sega Saturn often. And to be fair, that might be fair, but the Saturn had some pretty solid games on it. And this game has a certain charm to it. Some things to consider is, if you don't like the gameplay, maybe you'll like the graphics. If you don't like the graphics, hey, maybe you'll like the gameplay. There's certainly something here for you. Open world games can sometimes be freeing, like the original Legend of Zelda or even Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. It's very open, and this allows you to tackle that game however you see fit. And Virtual Hydlide attempts that freedom. But the game ends up frustrating more than anything else, unfortunately. But I'd say give it an A for effort. It was attempting to do this here. Running into random tough monsters in a game is actually very, exhilarating for me. When I was playing Virtual Hydlide, I was, stabbing slimes for a little bit, and then suddenly there was a treant. After I beelined into the woods, found some treants that absolutely mollywopped me, and that was just, it was over. But I find that sort of stuff pleasant. It feels like a real adventure where you could stumble into extreme danger. I like that stuff. I sort of think of Virtual Hydlide as Rick, the hormone monster from Big Mouth. He's absolutely past his prime, and he intends well, but he's just not as useful as he once was. And particularly just not as relevant as he once was. So let's appreciate that Virtual Hydlide walked, or you might say that it crawled, so that literally everybody else could run. It's not great, but it's certainly worth checking out. Like a boring exhibit in a museum. Since you're there, you might as well feign interest, give it a quick look, and move on to the more interesting looking things. Oh, that's nice. Moving on. It's only 4 hours if you wanted to knock it out and be like, hey, I beat that Sega Saturn game, I beat that Sega Saturn RPG. It's not going to take you very long. Blazing Heroes. Blazing Heroes was known as Mystaria, the Realms of Lore in Europe. It was known as Riglord Saga in Japan. What?
I don't know. Who am I?
The setup is that you have these 12 characters to fight 5 generals who serve Lord Bane, who has cast a spell on your mommy to make her give up the land of Queensland. Which I guess, does that make it Bane's land now? Or, I think he actually keeps it Queensland, which could be a little edible. Recruitment of these heroes isn't linear, and I think that's really neat. I think this makes it ahead of its time. This was a very forward-thinking setup, more so than I would have imagined. And the story readjusts itself to accommodate this feature. Whatever order you decide to pick somebody up in, the story's going to kind of fit and mold itself around you and your adventure, and whatever order you decide to go in. That's pretty ahead of its time. Maybe it's because I don't have any nostalgia for this game, but the graphics are just rough looking to me. It is certainly blocky and just not as charming as I thought it might be. Character growth in the game is based on used skills, almost like Final Fantasy II to some extent, but the characters seem to learn abilities almost at random sometimes. Maybe I'm wrong here. I mean, correct me if I am. Let me know in the comments, but it kind of feels that way. It's not like I haven't been wrong before. All the characters in the battle, PCs and NPCs, are all on a giant grid like most tactical games. The PCs all take their turn and then the enemies take their turn. It's just that's the way it works. Simple enough. When this game came out, it was, and is still, praised for high strategy, but it's also criticized for long battles. But realistically, that's what you get with strategy RPGs, right? Critics at the time had a few concerns about there being too little story and no voice acting at the time. Of course, the voice acting was sort of coming to a head now, like people were expecting voice acting in games. I guess that's like the trick at the time, right? And so to not have voice acting was just not to be at the cutting edge, I guess, of RPGs, despite how bad voice acting could be at the time, right?
A sad ending for the Sea Fox. Millions of dollars down the drain.
Despite the criticisms I named there, this game is favorably looked upon still, and at 21 hours to beat the game, it's really not that bad. It doesn't take that terribly long to finish this game, so if you can get past those blocky graphics or whatever, the gameplay is good. But that lack of voice acting, can't have that crap. If you want to play in Texas, you gotta have a fiddle in the band, you know what I mean? Now would be a good time for me to take my shirt off. No, it's a good time for me to remind you to subscribe to my channel. If you like RPG content, you like this sort of stuff, check out some of my other videos. I like talking about RPGs. I like talking about retro RPGs, new RPGs, all of this sort of stuff. Of course, I encourage you as well to like the video if you like the video, and then share it with other people. Let me know what kind of a job I'm doing. Thank you so much. Moving on. Shining the Holy Ark. This game is absolutely just filled with mystery and magic and medieval adventure, and that's exactly what I like in an RPG. The story is about a group of young heroes that are tasked with uncovering secrets behind a powerful artifact known as the Holy Ark. Not to be confused with the Ark of the Covenant, like that base melter. Or maybe it's another Holy Ark. While the narrative isn't groundbreaking, it serves its purpose. It gives us a reason to get out there and work these characters through some development, meet up some people, and gain some experience, and hey, that's what we like doing. If you're watching this video, you enjoy that stuff. I believe this game has some of the most absolutely stunning graphics for an RPG on the SEGA Saturn. I know this is dated looking for so many people, but this is super impressive to me graphically, especially when I think about the context of this game coming out. I say that a lot, but yeah, I think, where were graphics at this point? What other games were coming out at the time? Think about the late Super Nintendo RPGs. They look great. They look wonderful. But consider what the SEGA Saturn was doing here. It's just, it's so cool to think about. And at the time, I would see this game in magazines and such. I would get so excited to try it out. I never did get to try it as a kid, unfortunately, but I always looked forward to it. When I did get a chance to play it, man, it impressed me. It delivered. Graphics don't always have to be about blocks or jaggies and, criticizing that stuff. The style of the monsters in this game and the way the heroes enter battle is just so impressive looking. I know I talked about this one mostly for the graphics, but realistically, try it out. It's 30 hours. It's a longer RPG for the SEGA Saturn. And it is actually very well received, and it might be the most popular one on this list among the games I think that nobody talks about enough. But people should talk about it more and play it more. Just check out some of this footage and how it looks. I think it speaks for itself. Dark Savior. The game opens up and it's honestly kind of hilarious. You have this tragic moment where this guy dies and it was like, I'm looking forward to going hunting with you again. Just kind of like cheesy sort of stuff, but I like it. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's funny at this point. I can appreciate that.
When we get back to the world, we gotta put together that three-piece combo band we talked about. Me on stand-up bass, Johnny on the drums, and me tickling the ivories.
This game is, again, super impressive graphically. These sprites in this game are just absolutely gorgeous on this isometric plane. These sprites are huge and absolutely beautiful. See, I don't particularly like isometric planes in video games for the most part. There's a few that are good, that I can tolerate personally. But if you get frustrated navigating isometric planes, particularly with the direction pad, you may need to steer clear of this game. It wouldn't be such an issue, I don't think, if there weren't platforming parts that are just difficult. It's just difficult at times because the platforming is tough. Of course, emulating it made it a little easier. I would save state before a platforming part and then try it, and if I failed, I would just try it again. The game does have some simple puzzle solving, and I can appreciate that. I like that part of it. The combat, unfortunately, feels more like spam than technique. But maybe I didn't play enough of this game to really get a good grasp of the combat. Maybe it gets really good later on. A criticism I have is that the NPCs sure do have a lot to say. It is absolutely just walls of text sometimes. And some of the things they say just don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But again, these graphics, man. Watching this bird flap is just mesmerizing. Long story short, my feel about this game, incredible graphics. Gameplay is just not as impressive. But hey, if you like isometric games and you enjoy the original Mortal Kombat, maybe this is the way to go. If you can stomach the gameplay, the story is at least neat. It's confusing, but it's neat. And in consideration of my lack of taste for the combat system here, it's much more puzzle solving than combat from what I've experienced. And that's a good thing. The puzzles are fine. This game is not a very long game at all, coming in at only 6 hours. And that's probably where the appreciation lied for it when it came out as well. It's a beautiful game, cool puzzle solving, some Zelda-like stuff going on in it, and it's not terribly long. It doesn't overstay its welcome. Legend of Oasis. This game is a lot like Zelda, but with a few more RPG elements. It's like, imagine if an action role-playing game had a baby with Zelda, The Legend of Zelda. It's weird. Okay, yeah, let's do that again. Let's do that. Roll it back. It's like an action RPG had a baby with The Legend of Zelda. I say it pretty often regarding games, and particularly on this list, and maybe it's nostalgia goggles for these types of graphics, but again, the graphics in this game, it makes me sick. I'm disgusted how much I love this stuff. These sprites are just gorgeous. It makes me Because it's so Legend of Zelda-like, of course you have puzzle-solving elements, and they're done very well here. There's a spirit system sort of thing that helps you to manipulate the environment, which is part of the puzzle. Once you're buddies or friends with the spirits, you can extract these spirits from elements that you see on the playfield or the game field or whatever, and use those to fight and puzzle solve. It's a really fun and interesting system. I guess what makes this a little more obvious action RPG than other Zelda games is the ranking up that you get for items and combat, I guess. And then the HP and mana numbers stuff that's available in the menu, that all kind of feels a little more action RPG-esque, more so than Zelda. Just seeing those numbers there makes it feel a little more RPG. I can see why this game is considered such an excellent game, and at 6 hours, it's not overly long to finish. I mean, many Zelda games take considerably longer than that, so this is a breath of fresh air. If you're an RPG lover, man, this is one to check out. If you're a Zelda lover, this is a game to check out. It's so good. It's so good. And while it's probably the most popular game on this list, it's still one that gets buried under all of the Working Design's heavy hitters on the Saturn, and maybe even under some of the other games listed here. I think among all the games I've mentioned, all 5 of these games that I've mentioned, I would recommend most play Virtual Highlight. That's a mess. It's a fun mess. And then play Legend of Oasis because it's so good. There are just so many games available for us to play. So I think it's just neat to consider some of these older games, the ones that aren't the absolute top tier, the absolute 10 out of 10 bangers that we see each and every day. These are the grandpappies of video games, the older video games at this point that really laid the foundation for what would come next. It's kind of neat to take a trip down that road and look at some of those games, and I think it's fun to try to convince people to try them out. If you've enjoyed this list, again, I hope you'll stick around. I hope you'll stick around for some more videos and such. I appreciate you. I try to encourage positivity about games that aren't always positively revered, like Virtual Highlight, for example. If you got 4 hours to play a game in a week, you probably don't want to play Virtual Highlight. Don't get me wrong, but it's probably worth checking out, for real. Particularly if you like the history of video games. What are some other games for the Sega Saturn or some other systems you'd like to see a list like this for? I would like to hear some more of this stuff. I like having people try to convince me to play games while I try to convince you to play certain games. Absolutely fun. Just so fun to have this discourse because, well, hey, gaming discourse is important, right? And we should continue.